The Defiant held position at a respectful distance from the alien vessel. Its crystalline hull refracted light in patterns that seemed almost purposeful, a language written in prismatic shifts the human eyes couldn't quite comprehend. "They've accepted our communication protocols," Lieutenant Ramirez announced from the communication station. "Translation matrix is functioning at approximately 87% confidence." Admiral Hayes nodded, her weathered face betraying nothing of the storm of emotions beneath. Humanity had prepared for this moment for generations, but preparation was theory. Reality now hovered before them, strange and unknowable. "Open the channel," she ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a being unlike anything from Earth's evolutionary tree. The Morvani representative had a translucent exoskeleton through which complex organs pulsed with bioluminescent light. Multiple compound eyes arranged in a semicircular pattern studied the human bridge crew with unsettling intensity. "Greetings, representatives of Earth," the alien spoke, its words processed through the translation system. "I am Ambassador Velik of the Galactic Concordat. We have been observing your system for some time." Hayes straightened. "How long is some time, Ambassador?" A ripple of blue light cascaded through the Morvani's body, an expression, a biological tell. "Approximately 70 of your years, since your primitive fission weapon tests." The bridge crew exchanged glances. "The aliens have been watching since the 2080s, and you chose now to reveal yourselves." Hayes pressed. "Your development has accelerated beyond projected models." Velik's inner lights pulsed faster, particularly your military technologies. "We had calculated another century before your capabilities would warrant formal contact." Hayes maintained her diplomatic composure, but her mind raced through the implications. The Concordat had been monitoring Earth like scientists observing bacteria in a petri dish. "We would like to extend an invitation," Velik continued. "Send a delegation to the Assembly. Learn about the greater community of species. Your world stands at a threshold." "And if we decline?" Hayes asked. The Morvani's lights momentarily darkened. "That would be unfortunate for the continued stability of this sector." After preliminary exchanges and cautious cultural information sharing, Hayes accepted the ambassador's invitation to tour their vessel. Commander Jackson, head of security, accompanied her with a small team. The alien ship was a marvel, seemingly grown rather than built, with corridors that adjusted their dimensions to accommodate the visitors. What they lacked were evident weapon systems, defensive stations, or security checkpoints. The vessel appeared designed primarily for research and diplomacy. When they reached the observation deck, Hayes noticed a large display showing detailed schematics of Earth's defense grid, orbital platforms, and military installations. "You've been thorough in your observations," she noted coldly. Ambassador Velik's crystalline form seemed to dim slightly. "Standard protocol for pre-contact species assessment." Hayes gestured toward a portion of the display showing the Defiant's gravitational displacement weapons. "And your assessment of these?" "Remarkable," Velik admitted. "You developed gravitational weaponry for war." The question carried a tremor that the translation couldn't quite filter out. Hayes studied the alien carefully. "On Earth, Admiral Hayes, we developed every technology with dual purposes, creation and destruction. It's how we think. Most species develop such technologies for energy production, terraforming, or stellar navigation," Velik responded. "Your immediate military application is unique." The tour continued, but Hayes noticed the Morvani crew maintained greater distance from the humans afterward. When they returned to the Defiant, she immediately called a secure briefing with her senior staff. "They're afraid of us," Commander Jackson stated bluntly once the room was sealed. Hayes nodded. "Not just afraid. They're reassessing. Did you notice their defensive posture when we approached their engine section?" They accelerated the tour. Science Officer Dr. Williams pulled up his readings. "Their power signature spiked when you mentioned our weapon systems. I believe they were activating some kind of countermeasure." This invitation to their assembly, Hayes said thoughtfully. It's not diplomatic outreach. It's containment assessment. Should we decline? Asked Rodriguez, the civilian diplomatic attaché. Hayes stared at the holographic display of the Morvani vessel. No. Knowledge is tactical advantage. We accept their invitation, but we prepare the fleet. If the Concordat has been watching us for decades without contact, there's a reason they're reaching out now. A threat? Jackson suggested. Or they consider us the threat, Hayes replied. Either way, humanity needs to be ready. Send word to Earth Command. First contact established, proceeding with caution, and activate Protocol Vigilant Shield, quietly. As the Defiant maintained its position alongside the alien vessel, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that humanity had just been thrust onto a much larger chessboard, one where they didn't know the rules, the players, or even the objective. But if there was one thing humans understood better than most, it was how to adapt and survive. And if necessary, how to fight. The Earth delegation's quarters aboard the assembly station reflected the Concordat's attempt at hospitality and their fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology. The vast open chambers with transparent walls overlooking the void of space might impress species evolved in different environments, but to humans, they felt exposed and vulnerable. "They've given us a fishbowl," Rodriguez muttered as he adjusted the opacity settings for the third time. The walls finally dimmed to a more comfortable translucency. Better. Admiral Hayes stood at the room's center, studying the holographic map of the assembly station her hosts had provided. Not just a fishbowl, a monitored one. She gestured to nearly invisible nodes embedded in the architecture. Those aren't just environmental regulators. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Surveillance. Different technology than ours, but same principle. Hayes tapped her wrist device, activating the counter-surveillance field Earth intelligence had developed. A subtle vibration rippled through the air as the field engaged. Now we can talk freely, but only for 10 minutes before it becomes obvious. The diplomat loosened his formal collar. I've attended 17 first contact councils with Mars colonies and the Jupiter settlements. This feels different. Because it is, Hayes replied, bringing up her own data display. I've been analyzing the station's layout. Notice anything? Rodriguez studied the schematic. It's segmented by species. More than that, it's designed for containment. Hayes highlighted various security barriers. These sections can be sealed off individually. The life support systems are redundant but separately controlled. This isn't just a diplomatic hub. It's a fortress designed to isolate threats. And they've put us in the most containable sector, Rodriguez realized. Exactly. Hayes deactivated the display as her device signaled the 2-minute warning for their privacy field. In 12 hours, we present Earth's case for joining the Concordat. Keep your remarks focused on our scientific achievements, cultural diversity, and peaceful exploration goals. And the military aspects. Hayes' expression hardened. Let them ask. When they do, be honest but reserved. They already fear what they've glimpsed. Let's not confirm their worst suspicions immediately. The assembly chamber stretched upward in a vast dome, with thousands of representatives arranged in concentric rings. The Earth delegation occupied a newly installed platform near the bottom, the position traditionally assigned to probationary species. Rodriguez stood before the multitude of alien faces, his voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. He spoke of Earth's recovery from climate disaster, the unity achieved through the Mars colonization project, and humanity's philosophical renaissance. When he finished, the assembly's response was polite but measured, until the Vaxian representative, a reptilian being with iridescent scales and multiple limbs, raised a ceremonial staff. The delegate from Earth speaks eloquently of peace, the Vaxian's translated voice echoed. Yet our preliminary assessments show that 28% of Earth's global economy is dedicated to defense production. Explain this discrepancy. Rodriguez glanced at Hayes, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Humanity evolved as a species of tool makers and problem solvers, Rodriguez replied carefully. Our history taught us the value of preparation. Preparation for what? The vaccine pressed. Your system contains no natural threats requiring such investment. Hayes stepped forward. May I address this question? A murmur rippled through the assembly. Military personnel rarely spoke in these proceedings. With respect, Ambassador, Hayes began, her voice steady. Humanity doesn't prepare for known threats alone, but for the unknown. Our history is marked by unexpected challenges. We've learned that capability often prevents necessity. An interesting philosophy, remarked the Morvani representative. Yet our records indicate Earth has fought no interplanetary wars. Against whom is this capability directed? Against no one, Hayes answered. It exists because we cannot predict who or what we might encounter. She paused. As this very meeting demonstrates. The chamber fell silent. A new voice broke the tension, a gaseous entity contained in a floating apparatus. Perhaps a demonstration would be illuminating. Our intelligence suggests humans engage in simulated conflict for training purposes. Hayes hesitated. Earth's battle simulations were not classified, but they weren't public relations material either. A limited demonstration might foster understanding, Rodriguez offered diplomatically. Hours later, in a dedicated simulation chamber, Hayes directed a basic Earth naval exercise, a standard planetary defense scenario against multiple incoming threats. The assembled representatives watched in silence as the holographic Earth forces executed precision strikes, employed deception tactics, and coordinated complex battlefield maneuvers that prioritized minimal casualties alongside maximum effectiveness. When the simulation ended, the chamber remained silent until a small insectoid being spoke. Your species prepares to fight with such thoroughness. Is peace merely the absence of opportunity for conquest? Hayes met the alien's compound gaze directly. For humanity, Admiral Hayes answered, peace is what we protect through readiness, not what we sacrifice for convenience. As they left the chamber, Rodriguez whispered, I think you made an impression. Hayes nodded grimly. That's what worries me. Admiral Hayes slipped through the crowded reception hall, the formal diplomatic gala in full swing around her. Alien dignitaries mingled in a kaleidoscope of forms, some bipedal, others hovering on anti-gravity fields, a few existing as contained energy patterns. Under other circumstances, she might have marveled at the diversity. Tonight, her attention was elsewhere. Her neural implant pulsed with the decrypted communications she'd intercepted hours earlier. The Vaxian fleet movements weren't speculation anymore. They were fact. 17 warships, disguised as a routine patrol, had altered course toward the Sol system. Their encrypted orders contained one word that needed no translation. Mars. Hayes spotted Rodriguez across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a delegation of methane-breathing entities. She needed to extract him without drawing attention. The band of alien musicians shifted to a new composition, a discordant melody that humans would never classify as music, but seemed to please the majority of attendees. Hayes used the momentary commotion to approach Rodriguez. We need to talk, she whispered, maintaining her diplomatic smile. Now. Rodriguez nodded almost imperceptibly and smoothly excused himself from his conversation partners. They moved toward one of the observation balconies overlooking the vast starscape. What is it? He asked once they were relatively isolated. Hayes activated her personal scrambler, a device officially listed as a medical implant regulator. The Vaxians are moving on Mars. Attack formation, weapons hot. They'll arrive in 3 days. Rodriguez paled. You're certain? I accessed their command channels using the security vulnerabilities we discovered yesterday. She handed him her secure tablet. See for yourself. The diplomat scanned the information, his practiced composure slipping. They're discussing casualty projections, acceptable losses. His voice hardened, while smiling at us and offering trade agreements. It gets worse, Hayes continued. The Preservation Council knew. This attack has been sanctioned. Unofficially, of course. to demonstrate the necessity of Concordat protection. They expect us to beg for help after the Vaxians bloody our nose, Rodriguez realized. Then accept whatever terms they dictate. Hayes nodded grimly. Exactly. They underestimated us in every way possible. Rodriguez glanced back at the gala. We need to confront them with this evidence. Not yet, Hayes countered. The moment we reveal what we know, they'll accelerate their timetable or change strategies. We need the element of surprise. What are you suggesting? Hayes' eyes narrowed. I need to send a warning home. Immediately. There's a narrow-beam quantum transmitter in my quarters, supposedly shielded from detection. You smuggled in unauthorized communications equipment. Rodriguez hissed. Standard operating procedure for first contact missions since the Proxima incident, Hayes replied unapologetically. Earth needs to know, and Mars needs to prepare. Rodriguez ran a hand through his hair, diplomatic training warring with pragmatism. What's the message? Thunderbolt Protocol. Mars. 3 days. Recognition flashed across Rodriguez's face. The Thunderbolt Protocol. Earth's contingency for hostile first contact scenarios. That's a war footing order. It is, Hayes confirmed. But it's defensive positioning only. No first strikes. A group of Vaxian diplomats entered the balcony area, their scales gleaming under the ambient lighting. Hayes and Rodriguez smoothly shifted to casual conversation. The Earth sunset you described sounds captivating, Hayes said loudly for benefit of potential eavesdroppers, particularly from the Martian observation posts. Rodriguez caught on immediately. Yes, though I prefer the view from Earth. The Olympus Mons sunrise has become somewhat commercialized since the tourism expansion. The Vaxians lingered briefly before moving on, apparently satisfied that the humans were engaged in trivial conversation. I'll create a diplomatic incident, Rodriguez whispered once they were alone again. Request an emergency meeting with the Concordat Security Council. That should keep their attention here while you transmit. Hayes nodded. Once the message is sent, we continue as if nothing's wrong. Let them think their plan is proceeding undetected. And when Mars doesn't fall? Rodriguez asked. A cold smile crossed Hayes' face. Then the real negotiations begin. 2 hours later, as the gala reached its peak, and Rodriguez dramatically demanded an emergency session over alleged treaty violations, Hayes' quantum transmission cut through subspace toward Earth. The message was brief, encrypted, and would alter the course of human-alien relations forever. In her quarters afterward, Hayes stared at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, Mars hung in space, home to millions of humans who had no idea they were about to become the front line in humanity's first interstellar conflict. They should have done their homework, she murmured to herself. Humans don't take kindly to sucker punches. Admiral Michael Taylor stood on the bridge of the EFSS Invictus, his flagship cloaked in the shadow of Phobos. Around him, 37 warships of Earth's Second Fleet maintained perfect formation silence, their heat signatures masked, weapons powered down to minimal levels. To any standard scan, they were merely orbital debris or natural magnetic anomalies. Jump gate activation detected, announced Lieutenant Commander Rivera from the tactical station. Energy signature matches Concordat specifications. Taylor nodded calmly. Right on schedule. Status of Mars defense grid. Powered down as ordered, sir. Civilian alerts issued under guise of system maintenance. And our guests from the Intelligence Division. Commander Winters stepped forward, the specialized neural interface circlet on her head pulsing softly. Vaxian communication protocols fully mapped, Admiral. We can penetrate their encryption the moment they establish their command network. Taylor allowed himself a small smile. The Vaxians believed they were about to face a token orbital defense force, a handful of outdated platforms, and perhaps a few patrol ships. They had no idea they were sailing into the teeth of Earth's most advanced battle group. All ships maintain stealth protocol, Taylor ordered. Weapons authorization Delta 6. Precision strikes only. We want prisoners and intact ships for study. The bridge crew acknowledged their orders with practiced efficiency. Taylor had handpicked each of them for this mission, veterans of the resource wars who wouldn't panic when facing non-human adversaries. Vaxian formation emerging from jump gate, Rivera reported. 17 vessels in attack formation. Energy signatures indicate weapons charging. The main view screen displayed the Vaxian fleet, sleek, predatory vessels with organic-looking hulls. They moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, not bothering with evasive patterns. They're broadcasting to Mars colony, Winters reported. Standard intimidation package. Demands for immediate surrender. Threats of orbital bombardment. Classic shock and awe approach. Taylor watched as the Vaxian vessels spread into a blockade formation above Mars. The alien commander was following textbook invasion protocol. Establish orbital dominance, neutralize defensive capabilities, then deploy ground forces. They've launched targeting probes toward the main colony dome, Rivera warned. Taylor straightened his uniform. Spring the trap. All ships, execute maneuver Thermopylae. In perfect synchronization, the Earth fleet decloaked. Ships emerged from Phobos' shadow, from behind Mars' magnetic field, from within the debris field of the old terraforming stations. Within seconds, the Vaxian fleet found itself completely surrounded. Open fleet-wide channel, Taylor ordered. Let's introduce ourselves properly. The communications officer nodded, and Taylor addressed the Vaxian fleet. Attention unauthorized vessels in Mars orbital space. This is Admiral Michael Taylor of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered sovereign territory with weapons armed. Power down and prepare to be boarded, or we will respond accordingly. A moment of silence followed before the Vaxian commander's image appeared on screen, a reptilian being with elaborate scale patterns denoting high rank. This is Fleet Commander Zexfile of the Vaxian hegemony. There must be some misunderstanding. We are conducting authorized security exercises. Taylor cut him off. Save the diplomatic fiction, Commander. We intercepted your attack plans 3 days ago. He nodded to Winters, who broadcasted a sample of the Vaxian's own encrypted communications. Your options are simple: surrender or battle. Choose quickly. The Vaxian commander's scales darkened with what might have been rage or fear. You cannot possibly hope to. Targeting their propulsion systems, Taylor interrupted, signaling Rivera. Phase 1. The Earth fleet fired simultaneously. Not the crude projectile weapons the Vaxians expected, but precision energy lances that sliced through their shield harmonics as if they weren't there. 7 Vaxian vessels lost engine capability in the first volley. Electromagnetic warfare package, deploy, Taylor ordered. The second phase of Earth's attack wasn't visible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate. The Vaxian vessels' external lights flickered as their command networks crashed under the assault of tailored viruses and signal disruptors. They're attempting to return fire, Rivera reported. Targeting solutions degraded by 70%. The few Vaxian shots went wide, missing Earth vessels by significant margins. Their coordinated defense had collapsed into individual ships firing blindly. Deploy boarding teams, Taylor commanded. Priority target is their flagship. Specialized assault shuttles launched from Earth vessels, their hulls reinforced against defensive fire. Marine teams in powered combat armor prepared to board enemy vessels, a tactic no space-faring civilization had employed in centuries. Within 17 minutes, the battle was effectively over. 3 Vaxian ships attempted to flee and were disabled. The remainder, including the flagship, found themselves boarded by human marines who secured their bridges with shocking efficiency. When the Vaxian admiral was brought before Taylor as prisoner, his scales had paled to a sickly gray. "How did you anticipate us?" he demanded. "Our plans were perfect." Taylor regarded the alien commander with cold professionalism. "On Earth, we call it Tuesday." The assembly chamber had transformed from a venue of measured protocol into a chaotic arena. Species representatives shouted across the circular floor, while emergency translators struggled to keep pace with the overlapping voices. At the center of this diplomatic maelstrom stood Admiral Hayes and Diplomat Rodriguez, surrounded by a security cordon of nervous Concordat peacekeepers. Order. Bell of the Assembly Arbiter, a massive gelatinous entity whose translucent body flashed with bioluminescent patterns of distress. We will have order. The tumult gradually subsided as Hayes calmly activated the holographic display. Footage from the Mars engagement played in stunning clarity. Earth vessels emerging from perfect ambush positions, the precision strikes that disabled rather than destroyed, and most impressively, the boarding operations that captured Vaxian ships intact. As you can see, Hayes continued, her voice steady, Earth defended its territory with measured restraint. We prioritized minimal casualties and asset preservation. Restraint. The Vaxian representative's scales quivered with rage. You ambushed a peaceful security exercise. Hayes tapped her console, and new footage appeared. The Vaxian commander's own recorded orders discussing acceptable civilian casualty rates for the Mars operation. Your definition of peaceful differs significantly from ours, Rodriguez noted dryly. The Tresian delegate, a tall avian being whose feather crest had remained raised throughout the proceedings, stepped forward. The Preservation Council acknowledges no prior knowledge of this unauthorized military action. Hayes raised an eyebrow and switched the display to intercepted communications between Preservation Council members and Vaxian Command. Perhaps this will refresh your memory, Counselor. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the assembly as timestamps and verification codes proved the Council's complicity. The Tresian's feathers flattened against his body, a sign of extreme distress or embarrassment. These communications were secured by 14 layers of quantum encryption. The Morvani representative protested. How could you possibly? Earth has devoted considerable resources to information security, Hayes interrupted, both offensive and defensive. A necessity given our history. The implications sank in across the chamber. If humans could break the Concordat's most secure communication so easily, what other capabilities had they developed? The question before this assembly, Rodriguez said, reclaiming control of the conversation, is not how Earth defended itself, but why such defense was necessary. We came here in good faith. Good faith. A methane-breathing delegate's translator crackled. Your species maintains military capacity sufficient to capture our most advanced vessels with minimal effort. You develop technologies for warfare that other species develop for science. How can the Concordat feel secure with such a predator in our midst? Before Rodriguez could respond, alarm klaxons shattered the tense atmosphere. Emergency displays activated throughout the chamber as priority transmissions flooded in. Multiple attacks reported along the galactic rim, announced the Assembly Arbiter, its body pulsing with urgent patterns. Concordat outposts on Helios Prime, Vega Colony, and Proxima Station report unknown hostile forces. Defensive fleets are overwhelmed. The chamber erupted again as representatives demanded information about their homeworlds and colonies. Through the chaos, Hayes studied the incoming tactical data with professional interest. These attack patterns are coordinated, she observed to Rodriguez. Whoever they are, they've been planning this for some time. The Tresian representative suddenly appeared beside them, his earlier hostility replaced by barely concealed panic. Admiral Hayes, the Security Council requests your immediate consultation. Hayes exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. My consultation. The defensive forces at all three locations have been neutralized. The Tresian admitted. The attackers employ tactics our military has never encountered. And now you need someone who understands warfare, Hayes concluded. The Tresian's head lowered in what might have been humility or shame. Perhaps we judged too quickly what we did not understand. A small, tight smile crossed Hayes' face as she studied the tactical displays showing the overwhelming force advancing through Concordat space. We know something about fighting that you've forgotten. As they moved toward the emergency council chambers, Rodriguez caught Hayes' arm. They tried to attack Mars, and now they want our help. Hayes nodded. The universe has a sense of humor, it seems. What will you tell them? Hayes watched the panicked representatives scrambling to contact their homeworlds. I'll tell them that Earth will help, but the terms of our membership in this Concordat will need substantial revision. Her expression turned serious. And I'll tell them to prepare for war in a way they haven't known for millennia. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity's martial heritage, though brutal, might become its greatest gift to the stars. Admiral Hayes stood before the holographic display in the hastily assembled war room aboard the Concordat battle station orbiting Helix 9. The agricultural world's vast fields of alien crops stretched across the planet's surface below, a breadbasket for 17 Concordat species that would fall within days if the defense failed. Your vessels are positioned incorrectly, Hayes stated bluntly to the assembled Concordat military leadership. The Vorax will target your command ships first, then methodically eliminate your support vessels. The Concordat fleet commander, a Dralaxian whose crystalline exoskeleton sparkled under the tactical lights, shifted uncomfortably. This formation has served the Concordat for 8 centuries. Our doctrine prioritizes visible strength to deter aggression. Deterrence only works when your opponent fears loss, Hayes countered. The Vorax hive mind values individual ships as we value individual cells, expendable for the whole. She gestured to Lieutenant Commander Wilson. Show them the simulation. Wilson activated his tactical pad, and the holographic display shifted to show the current Concordat formation facing a simulated Vorax attack. The result was devastating. Within minutes, the orderly Concordat lines collapsed under the Vorax's seemingly chaotic but devastatingly effective assault patterns. This is what happened at Proxima Station, Hayes continued, and Vega Colony, and every other Concordat world that has fallen. She waved her hand, clearing the display. Now, here's what we're going to do instead. The hologram reconfigured to show a radically different defensive posture, layered, asymmetrical, with deliberate vulnerabilities that were actually carefully prepared kill zones. This formation presents apparent weaknesses that will draw the Vorax into prepared engagement areas, Hayes explained. Their hive mind processes battlefield data collectively, making them predictable once you understand their algorithms. A Morvani science officer studied the projection. You intend to use psychological warfare against a hive consciousness. That's unprecedented. That's human thinking, Hayes replied. We've fought ourselves enough to understand how even collective intelligences develop blind spots and preferences. The Concordat officers exchanged glances, their discomfort with human military philosophy evident. Nevertheless, after witnessing the fall of 3 major worlds, they had little choice but to adapt. The Earth vessels will form the central response force, Hayes continued. Your ships will maintain these positions, engaging only when Vorax vessels enter your predetermined fire zones. Precision is more important than volume. And if they break through? Asked the Dralaxian commander. They won't, Hayes stated with a confidence that silenced the room. 12 hours later, Hayes stood on the bridge of the EF's Dauntless as the Vorax fleet emerged from subspace. The alien armada was a disturbing sight. Organic mechanical hybrid vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, moving in swarm formations that constantly shifted like schools of predatory fish. 117 hostile contacts, reported the tactical officer, matching known Vorax configurations. Hayes nodded calmly. All ships maintain positions, weapons free only on my command. The Vorax advanced cautiously at first, their collective intelligence prodding the unusual defensive formation. As Hayes had predicted, they soon identified what appeared to be a vulnerability in the left quadrant and diverted a substantial force to exploit it. They're taking the bait, Hayes observed. Concordat vessels in sectors 3 and 4, stand by. The Vorax ships accelerated toward the perceived weakness, directly into the overlapping fields of fire Hayes had established. At her command, precisely targeted energy lances from concealed Concordat ships sliced through the attacking force. The Vorax immediately adapted, pulling back and reassessing. Their next approach targeted a different sector with a larger force. "They're learning," noted Commander Jackson, "adjusting for our first trap." "As expected," Hayes replied. "Execute Deception Protocol Delta." 4 Earth vessels suddenly broke formation, appearing to flee in disarray. The Vorax, sensing weakness, committed nearly 30% of their forces to pursue. "Now," Hayes ordered. The fleeing Earth ships abruptly reversed course, while hidden defensive platforms activated behind the pursuing Vorax vessels. Caught in a devastating crossfire, the alien ships suffered heavy losses before they could react. The battle continued for hours, with the Vorax attempting increasingly desperate strategies, each anticipated and countered by Hayes' defensive plan. As the alien force diminished, Hayes executed her most controversial tactic. "Allow Scout Vessel Echo 7 to disengage with minimal damage," she ordered. "Ensure its sensors record our full capability deployment, then let it escape." "Admiral," the Dralaxian commander protested, "allowing any enemy to escape violates basic doctrine." Hayes smiled coldly. "Sometimes the most effective weapon is the enemy's fear." The damaged Vorax scout broke away from the battle, accelerating into subspace. Within an hour, the remaining Vorax vessels withdrew, abandoning their attack without achieving a single objective. As the Concordat officers celebrated their first victory against the Vorax, Hayes studied the tactical display thoughtfully. "They'll be back," she warned. "But not here. They'll choose a different target, one they believe is less protected." "How can you be certain?" asked the Morveni science officer. "Because that's what I would do," Hayes replied. "And warfare, regardless of the species waging it, follows universal principles. You just need to understand your enemy's nature." For the first time since the Vorax appeared, the Concordat had hope. What they didn't yet realize was that this was merely the opening move in humanity's longer strategic game. The command center aboard Nexus Prime Station hummed with tense activity as the largest Vorax fleet yet recorded emerged from subspace. 5 massive Hive ships formed the center of the enemy formation, each surrounded by swarms of smaller attack craft that moved with unsettling synchronization. 5-to-1 odds, muttered a Concordat officer. "Even with your strategies, Admiral." Hayes ignored the comment, her focus locked on the tactical display. "Status of our combat neural networks." Lieutenant Commander Wilson nodded from his station. "Online and synchronized, Admiral. All Earth vessels are linked for microsecond response time. Concordat ships are receiving targeting data through secondary channels. Colonel Jackson, status of boarding teams." The Marine commander's voice came through clear on the comm. "Strike teams prepped and ready in assault shuttles. Combat armor powered in green across the board." Hayes studied the approaching Vorax formation. After their defeat at Helix 9, the hive mind had altered its approach, adopting more cautious tactics. The escaped scout had served its purpose well. The Vorax now recognized humans as dangerous opponents, but they had committed their largest force yet to Nexus Prime, determined to overwhelm through sheer numbers what they couldn't defeat through superior tactics. "They're adapting," Hayes observed, "but they still think linearly." She turned to the Concordat's Supreme Commander. "Begin Phase 1. The first layer of defense activated. Automated drone platforms that appeared to be standard Concordat weaponry, but had been extensively modified by Earth engineers. The platforms engaged the forward elements of the Vorax fleet, drawing them into predetermined vectors. "They're responding exactly as predicted," reported the tactical officer. "Committing interceptors to eliminate our forward defenses." Hayes nodded. "Activate our Combat Eye network. Full predictive modeling." This was the element that had most disturbed the Concordat leadership, Earth's military artificial intelligence systems that could process battlefield data and predict enemy responses before they occurred. For species that had evolved beyond warfare, the concept of machines designed specifically to outthink enemies was morally troubling. For humans, it was simply the next logical step in combat evolution. The results were immediate. Earth vessels began firing at points where Vorax ships would be, not where they were. intercepting their movements with uncanny precision. The synchronized response created cascading failures in the Vorax formation as the hive mind struggled to process and counter the unpredictable attack patterns. They're attempting to compensate by increasing randomization in their movements, Wilson reported. Exactly as expected, Hayes replied. Execute Thermopylae Gamut. The most controversial element of Hayes' battle plan began. 1/3 of the human fleet suddenly broke formation, creating what appeared to be a catastrophic gap in the defensive line. The Vorax, sensing opportunity, immediately committed their main force toward the gap. "Admiral," the Concordat commander protested, "they're heading straight for the station's primary docking ring." "I know," Hayes responded calmly. "Fighter squadrons, execute attack pattern Epsilon." Commander David Wilson's fighter wings emerged from concealed positions behind Nexus Prime's outer ring structures. Rather than engaging the Vorax fighters directly, they targeted the command nodes on the larger high ships with surgical precision. The human pilots executed maneuvers that the Concordat officers watched with a mixture of horror and admiration. Trajectories that skimmed destruction, pushing their craft beyond designed safety parameters. "How are they flying like that?" whispered a Morvani officer. "Their inertial forces should be lethal." "Modified acceleration compensators," Hayes explained, "and pilots who train for exactly these scenarios." As the Vorax main force committed to the apparent breach, Hayes gave the order that would define the battle. "Colonel Jackson, you have a go for boarding operations." Marine assault shuttles launched from concealed bays, their reinforced hulls absorbing punishment that would have destroyed standard vessels. They targeted the largest Vorax high ship, attaching to its organic hull like parasites. Reach teams reporting successful entry. Jackson's voice reported through occasional static. Proceeding to central node. The Concordat officers watched in disbelief as helmet camera feeds showed Earth Marines in powered combat armor cutting through the Vorax ship's interior, an environment of organic mechanical horror that would have paralyzed most species with revulsion. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, as if they had trained for this specific scenario for years. "They're reaching the command core," Hayes noted, watching Jackson's team advance. "Begin final phase." The track closed as concealed Earth heavy cruisers emerged from behind Nexus Prime's moon, catching the committed Vorax fleet in a devastating crossfire. With their formation scattered and command structure under direct assault from within, the Vorax collective consciousness faced something it had never encountered: strategic defeat. "High ship command node secured," Colonel Jackson reported, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Marines are planting the Earth flag now, Admiral." Transmitting footage. The image appeared on the main screen. Human Marines standing in the captured nerve center of the most advanced Vorax vessel, Earth's flag prominently displayed against the alien architecture. It was a moment that would be broadcast across the galaxy, the day humanity announced its arrival on the galactic stage, not through diplomacy, but through unprecedented military victory. "Begin mop-up operations," Hayes ordered, allowing herself a small smile. "And someone tell Colonel Jackson, I expect that ship intact for study." The ceremonial hall of the newly christened Galactic Alliance headquarters on Mars gleamed with the emblems of 23 species, where once the Concordat symbol had dominated, a stylized representation of peaceful cooperation. Now hummed the Alliance's new insignia, a shield behind a galaxy spiral, embodying protection alongside unity. Fleet Admiral Jessica Hayes adjusted her formal dress uniform as she prepared to address the first graduating class of the Multi-Species Defense Academy. Through the viewports, Earth hung as a blue jewel in the distance, no longer an isolated world, but the military heart of a new interstellar coalition. "Nervous?" asked Thomas Rodriguez, now serving as Earth's representative to the Alliance Security Council. Hayes smiled slightly. "Public speaking was never my preferred battlefield. You faced down 5 Vorax high ships. I think you can handle 60 cadets." "The high ships were more predictable," Hayes replied dryly. The ceremony commenced with representatives from each member species introducing their cadets. Hayes studied the diverse gathering: crystalline Morvani, reptilian Vaxians, avian Trigens, and a dozen other morphologies, all wearing variations of the Alliance uniform adapted to their physiologies. When her turn came, Hayes stepped to the podium, her voice carrying across the chamber without technological enhancement, a skill developed through years of battlefield command. 1 year ago, she began, many of us stood on opposite sides of a cultural divide. The Concordat viewed Earth as a dangerous anomaly, a species that had developed advanced technology without shedding its martial nature. We viewed the Concordat as naive, having forgotten fundamental truths about survival in an unforgiving universe. She paused, surveying the assembled cadets. We were both right, and both wrong. Humanity's history of conflict gave us skills and perspectives that peaceful civilizations had lost. The Concordat's history of cooperation gave them cultural and diplomatic frameworks that humanity is still learning. The Vorax threat revealed that neither approach alone was sufficient. Hayes gestured toward the viewport where distant construction platforms showed Alliance vessels being built according to Earth designs, but incorporating technologies from a dozen member species. The ships you will serve on represent this new synthesis. Concordat propulsion systems paired with Earth weapons technology, Morvani sensor arrays linked to human tactical systems, Vaxian regenerative hull materials protecting Trigen communication arrays. She turned to a holographic display showing the latest intelligence from the Galactic Rim. The Vorax had withdrawn to their core systems, establishing a defensive perimeter rather than continuing their expansion. For the first time in their collective memory, the Vorax retreat, not because we destroyed them, but because we introduced an element they cannot process: uncertainty. Their hive mind evolved to consume predictable opponents. Humanity's approach to warfare, our willingness to take calculated risks, to sacrifice for strategic advantage, to think beyond doctrine, represents a problem they cannot solve. Hayes stepped away from the podium, addressing the cadets more directly. Each of you will carry this new philosophy to the stars. The Trigen cadets will teach human squadrons about spatial awareness that evolved from millennia of aerial hunting. The Morvani will share sensory processing that perceives spectrum ranges humans cannot imagine. And humanity. She paused. We will teach you that sometimes victory requires you to risk everything on an uncertain outcome. In the front row, a young Vaxian officer, from the same species that had attempted to attack Mars a year earlier, raised his hand. Admiral Hayes, my people's historical records show that we were once warriors, centuries ago. We considered this a primitive phase of our development. How do we embrace military thinking without losing the peace we achieved? Hayes considered the question carefully. The strongest warrior is one who fights not for glory, but for protection. Earth's military history is filled with atrocities we're not proud of, but also with those who sacrifice themselves to shield others. That's the tradition we bring to the Alliance, not conquest, but guardianship. After the ceremony, Hayes stood in the observation dome, watching as training exercises unfolded on the Martian surface below. Alliance cadets practiced maneuvers together, their different physiologies requiring creative adaptations to standard tactics. Quite a sight, said Rodriguez, joining her. A year ago, they feared us. Now they want to be us. Hayes shook her head. Not to be us. To learn from us as we learn from them. She watched as a human instructor demonstrated combat techniques to a group of non-human cadets. We're creating something new here. The Preservation Council has proposed a rather interesting memorial on their homeworlds, Rodriguez mentioned. The necessary warriors, they're calling it. Acknowledging that the galaxy needed a species that remembered how to fight. Hayes smiled faintly. History has a sense of irony. We spent millennia learning to fight, hoping someday we wouldn't need to. Instead, we found a galaxy that needed us precisely because we had. Below them, the diverse cadets moved in formation, former adversaries now united in common purpose, the first generation of a new kind of peace, preserved not through forgetfulness, but through vigilance. The stars no longer quaked in fear of Earth's military strength, but in appreciation of the shield it provided.